Everyone, we're going to take a look at number 9 in section 5.1. They want you to calculate L4 and R4. So this is the left-hand sum with 4 subintervals, and this is the right-hand sum with 4 intervals over the interval from 0 to 5, and for the function 2x squared. And give your answers to 3 decimal places. Again, your problem might be slightly different than the one shown here. The numbers might be slightly off, or the number of subintervals may be different, or the interval may be different, but the idea will be the same. So we'll first start with the fact that we will have 4 subintervals, right? What's the width of each subinterval? Since we're going to use equal widths, the width of the subinterval delta x is the length of the interval, right? From 0 to 5, the length would be 5, and we divide by the number of subintervals 4. So 5/4, which I would express as a decimal. If you can write the interval width, the delta x, as a decimal, I would. If it's like 1/3, I would leave it as 1/3, because you want to, not round into the end on these problems. So we start with x of 0, right? What are the endpoints of our subintervals? X of 0 is, of course, 0, the left endpoint of our interval. And then I just add 1.25 to get the next endpoint. Add 1.25 again, 1.25 again. And by the time you get to x of 4, you should be at 5, right? Which is your right endpoint. If not, something is incorrect. So there's our endpoints of our subintervals. First subinterval is from 0 to 1.25. Next subinterval, 1.25 to 2.5, 2.5 to 3.75, and the fourth subinterval from 3.75 to 5. Each are the same width. So how do we find our left-hand sum? Well, we'll use the width of the rectangles we get will be 1.25. What will the heights be? They'll be based on the left-hand endpoint. So the first rectangle from 0 to 1.25 would use the left-hand value 0. So I evaluate the function f at 0. Remember, here's our function 2x squared. I'm going to evaluate that 0 multiplied times delta x. Height times width will give me the area of that rectangle. The second interval from 1.25 to 2.5 will have a left-hand endpoint of 1.25. So I evaluate the function at 1.25 to get the height times the same width to find the area of that rectangle. The third subinterval, the left-hand endpoint is 2.5, and the last subinterval, the left-hand endpoint is 3.75. So I'm going to factor out the delta x from each one of these, and if I do so, remember delta x is 1.25. I'll get 1.25 times the quantity, what? F of 0. Well, if I plug in 0 into this function, I get 0. So I'm just putting 0. Plus f of 1.25. So replace x with 1.25. I have 2 times the quantity 1.25 squared. F of 2.5. And then finally f of 3.75. So we add those up. So I would use the calculator at this point. They want to round that to 3 decimal places. So I did that in my calculator. Got the old school TI 83 plus here. So I did 1.25, right, times, I didn't put the 0. So I started here with 2 times 1.25 squared plus 2 times 2.5 squared plus 2 times 3.75 squared. And I get this. Of course, it's rounding to 3 decimal places. So this 7, notice the next digits of 5, we're going to round that 7 up, right? 2 and 8. So watch your rounding rules there when you give your answer. So make sure you follow the directions carefully. These parenthetical statements that they have in Achieve are important. Okay, right-hand sum is very similar, except we'll use the right-hand endpoints. So we still have, I'm going to just go right in this form, factor out the delta x from each of these. And so we have the width times the individual heights of each rectangle. But now on the first interval from 0 to 1.25, we'll use the right-hand endpoint of 1.25. So we'll start with that as the height of our first rectangle. And then from 1.25 to 2.5, we'll use the right-hand endpoint 2.5. 2.5 to 3.75, we'll use 3.75, and the last subinterval, the right-hand endpoint is 5. So we'll evaluate each of these, and again, I did that in my calculator. It's my second expression here, and when we do that, we get 117.1875. Again, I'm going to round to 3 decimal places, so that 7 is going to get rounded up to an 8. Okay, I hope this is helpful. If not, let me know. And here's my goat.